Okay, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Nick Fuentes.
Right.
Um, you've probably heard the name linked to some pretty crazy events lately.
Yeah.
And, the whole thing just kind of makes you scratch your head like, is this guy like a legitimate visionary
Yeah.
leading a movement? Or is he just like a master manipulator kind of playing the system?
Yeah. Is he a grifter or is he gifted?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to try to get to the bottom of today. We've got a whole stack of articles, social media posts.
Yeah.
We even dug up some court documents
Wow.
for this one, so we are really going deep
Deep dive.
to try to understand Nick Fuentes.
He's a fascinating figure.
He is.
I mean, he's got this huge following, like especially among young people, but he's been banned from pretty much every mainstream platform.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, like you name it, he's been kicked off.
It's like he's almost intentionally pushing buttons to get a reaction.
Yeah, and it's working.
Yeah, so let's kind of rewind a little bit, take it back to the beginning. Tell me about his early life. How did he get into politics?
So you might be surprised to hear that Fuentes was already expressing pretty strong political views way back in high school.
Really?
He even had his own local radio and TV shows.
Wow. So like a political pundit before most kids are even thinking about college applications.
Exactly.
Was he always kind of leaning towards the right? Was that always kind of his?
There were definitely indicators.
Okay.
When he went to Boston University, he gained notoriety pretty quickly. Not necessarily for his academics, but for some of his controversial statements and actions.
Okay.
And he really, by the time he left college, he was already a recognized figure in far-right circles.
So unpack his ideology for me a little bit. Like, what are the core beliefs that kind of define his worldview?
So Fuentes is very open about his white nationalist views.
Okay.
He's a strong advocate for the creation of a white Christian nation and the preservation of what he calls, European American identity and culture.
Okay, so we're talking about someone who's operating on like the extreme end of the political spectrum.
For sure.
But he also uses like irony and plausible deniability as part of his rhetoric.
He's a master of it.
Right.
He's incredibly skilled at using irony and humor as a shield.
Right.
He'll make these outrageous statements and then he'll say, oh, I was just joking or I was being sarcastic.
Right.
It makes it really hard to pin him down on what he really believes and what his intentions are.
So it's kind of this classic tactic of a lot of these controversial figures like blur the lines, make people question what's real, what's performance.
Exactly.
But when you peel back the layers of irony, what's the core message that he's sending to his followers?
At its core, he's really pushing this narrative that white people are being systematically replaced and marginalized in America.
Okay.
And he's also very much into these conspiracy theories, including Holocaust denial and antisemitic tropes.
Okay.
And it's through this kind of rhetoric that he's been able to attract this really dedicated following, primarily young, disaffected white men who feel like they've been left behind by society.
Which brings us to the America First movement, which he founded. What was kind of the driving force behind that movement?
So he really built America First on the anxieties and frustrations of this demographic,
Right.
He positioned himself as the champion of those who felt forgotten, and he really tapped into their fears and grievances.
Right.
It's a classic play from the populist playbook, and in Fuentes' case, it really resonated.
So then there's the Groyper War, this campaign against Turning Point USA.
Yes.
Can you break down what that was all about and why he kind of targeted them?
So Turning Point USA, or TPUSA as it's known, is another conservative organization,
Right.
but Fuentes saw them as far too moderate.
Okay.
He accused TPUSA and its founder, Charlie Kirk, of betraying Donald Trump by advocating for policies that were, in his view, too accommodating to immigrants and other groups that he saw as a threat to his vision of America.
So like fake conservatives basically not going far enough.
Exactly. He launched the Groyper War, which
Right.
was this very online, very meme-driven campaign to disrupt TPUSA events and kind of expose them as, what he believed to be sellouts
Gotcha.
to the true conservative cause. And his goal was really to push the Republican Party even further to the right.
Yeah.
And he saw TPUSA as an obstacle to that.
Okay, so we can't really talk about Fuentes without addressing The elephant in the room, Donald
Of
Trump.
course.
Big supporter, right?
A huge supporter. Fuentes was a very vocal supporter of Trump's 2016 campaign and remained loyal throughout his presidency.
Okay.
However, things took an interesting turn in 2024 when his Groyper army launched a meme campaign against Trump's 2024 campaign staff,
Oh, wow.
accusing them of ignoring their concerns and not prioritizing their agenda.
So he's turning on Trump's team even though he's still a Trump supporter.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird situation.
That's confusing.
It really highlights how Fuentes operates.
Okay.
He's not afraid to bite the hand that feeds him if he
Yes.
feels like his core supporters are being ignored, you
Yeah.
know? He's playing a long game, and loyalty seems to be secondary to his ultimate goals.
And remember that infamous dinner he had with Trump and Kanye West at Mar-a-Lago?
Oh, yeah. How could we forget?
That was big news.
Huge news.
And Trump claimed that he had no idea who Fuentes was.
He did. Yeah, it was November 2022.
Yeah.
And it sparked outrage and condemnation. A lot of people accused Trump of legitimizing Fuentes' views just by associating with him even unknowingly.
Right.
It really put Fuentes in the national spotlight and fueled this debate about whether he was a dangerous extremist or just a provocateur.
It definitely added fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
And speaking of provocative, Fuentes had some pretty inflammatory things to say about the overturning of Roe versus Wade,
Yeah.
comparing it to Taliban rule.
Yeah, that was a deeply disturbing statement.
It was.
He said that overturning Roe v. Wade was like Taliban rule in a good way.
Wow.
Because in his view, it promoted traditional values and restricted women's reproductive rights. It's a prime example of how he uses these shocking statements to grab attention and further his agenda.
So we've got a Trump supporter who admires the Taliban and promotes white nationalist ideology. This is getting pretty complicated.
It is.
So where do we go from here?
Well, let's look at how, despite being banned from all these major platforms, Fuentes has been able to continue spreading his message.
Right.
He's incredibly savvy when it comes to using these alternative platforms like Telegram and Gettr
Right.
to reach his audience. And he's also partnered with other controversial figures like Milo Yiannopoulos, which allows him to tap into their existing networks and reach an even wider audience.
So it's like he thrives on being this outsider,
Yeah.
the one that the mainstream is trying to silence.
The victim.
But is it all an act?
Right.
Is this carefully crafted persona? Is it all part of like a bigger plan?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
Is he a true believer in this ideology that he promotes? Or is he a master manipulator who understands how to leverage controversy for personal gain? It's really difficult to say with certainty, but his actions definitely suggest a calculated approach to building his platform and his influence.
And then there's his recent arrest for battery, which kind of throws another wrench into things.
Yeah, that's a big development.
It is.
It raises serious questions about his behavior and the limits of free speech.
So what happened there?
A woman accused Fuentes of pepper spraying her after she confronted him at his home,
Oh, wow.
apparently in response to a post he made on X that seemed to mock the pro-choice movement.
So we've got this very complex and controversial figure who's built a movement on the back of outrage and provocation.
He has?
And it really begs the question, is this a case of someone finally facing the consequences of their actions or just another chapter in this carefully crafted narrative of Nick Fuentes?
That's a great question.
Like, what stands out to you from all of this?
I think for me, it's that question of authenticity.
Okay.
Like, is Fuentes truly committed to this ideology, or is he playing a character? To gain power and influence, it's a question that I keep coming back to as we kind of dig deeper into his world.
And it's a question that applies to so many figures who occupy that space where charisma and controversy collide.
It does?
Like, how can you tell a visionary from a con artist?
Right.
You know, it's something we all need to be thinking about as we navigate this increasingly complex world of information and influence.
It really is. It's a crucial question in this day and age.
Right.
You know, we're constantly bombarded with information and all these strong personalities vying for our attention.
Yeah.
And we really need to develop a critical eye.
Right.
You know, the ability to look beyond the surface and assess the motivations behind the message is more important than ever.
It's true. We can't just passively consume information anymore.
Nope.
We have to be active participants,
We do.
questioning, analyzing, forming our own conclusions.
And that's what we try to do here on Grifter or Gifted.
Exactly.
You know, we're not giving you answers. We're giving you the tools to answer those questions for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's continue our deep dive into Nick Fuentes and see if we can unravel the enigma that he is.
Okay. He's like a master of self-promotion.
Yeah.
He clearly understands how to weaponize controversy in this digital age.
Right.
He knows how to get people talking, even if it's negative intention, and he uses that to his advantage.
Yeah, he's definitely tapped into a very specific nerve in our culture, right?
Absolutely.
Like he wouldn't have this level of influence if his message wasn't resonating with a significant segment of the population.
And that's what makes this so concerning.
Right.
You know, he's giving a voice to a very dangerous ideology. He's
Okay.
normalizing it, and he's spreading those ideas to a wider audience, particularly among young people who are more susceptible to this kind of rhetoric.
Which brings up a really important question. How much responsibility do platforms have in amplifying these kinds of extremist voices?
Right.
It's a debate that's been raging for years, but it feels even more urgent now.
It's a really complex issue with no easy answers. On the one hand, platforms want to protect free speech, and they don't want to be accused of censorship.
Right.
But on the other hand, they have a responsibility to prevent the spread of hate speech and the incitement of violence.
Right.
So finding that balance is a constant struggle.
And Fuentes seems to be really good at exploiting those gray areas. Like, he pushes the boundaries just far enough to get banned,
Yeah.
but then he finds new ways to pop up on other platforms.
It's like a game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
And each time he gets banned, it kind of fuels his narrative of martyrdom.
Right.
It further solidifies his image as this victim of the mainstream media.
Right.
And it deepens the loyalty of his followers.
So speaking of his followers who are these Groypers,
Right.
what is it about his message that resonates so strongly with them that drives them to kind of embrace such an extreme ideology?
So many of his followers, as we mentioned earlier, are young white men
Yeah.
who feel disenfranchised and alienated.
Okay.
They feel forgotten, ignored, and left behind by the rapid societal changes happening around them. And Fuentes offers them this sense of belonging, a community where their anxieties and grievances are not only acknowledged, but validated.
So they're drawn to this narrative of white victimhood, the idea that they're being replaced and that their way of life is under attack.
Exactly. And it's a very powerful narrative, especially when it's delivered with the kind of charisma and conviction that Fuentes possesses.
Right.
You know, he comes across as this rebel, this fighter, someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo and say what they believe to be the unspoken truth, no matter how offensive it might be.
Right.
It's a really potent combination, and it's proving to be very effective in mobilizing a certain segment of the population.
And that's what makes this so dangerous.
Right.
It's not just some random internet personality ranting in obscurity.
No.
This is a skilled organizer and a propagandist who's actively building a movement that has the potential to spill over from the online world into real-world consequences.
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
And it raises the question of what can be done to counter his influence and prevent the spread of this ideology.
Right.
It's a question that a lot of experts are grappling with right now, and there's no easy solution.
So some people argue that deplatforming him is the best approach, like cutting off his access to the megaphone of social media.
Right.
But others worry that it could backfire,
Yeah.
that it could further radicalize his followers and drive them underground where they're even harder to reach.
It's a tough call.
It is.
And both approaches have their risks.
Yeah.
It's a really complex problem that requires a multifaceted solution.
Right.
You know, there's also the issue of education and critical thinking.
Right.
Like, how do we equip people, particularly young people, with the tools to recognize and resist this kind of extremist propaganda?
It's like we're living in this age of information warfare.
We are.
This constant battle for hearts and minds, where critical thinking is our most powerful weapon.
And figures like Fuentes are formidable opponents in that battle.
They are.
They understand how to use the internet to their advantage, how to manipulate algorithms and exploit outrage to spread their message.
So what does this all mean for the future of American politics?
Right.
Is Fuentes' brand of extremism like a growing threat, or is it just a fringe movement that will eventually fizzle out?
It's really hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But one thing is clear, the lines between mainstream and fringe politics are becoming increasingly blurred.
Yeah.
Fuentes has already had some success in infiltrating the Republican Party, and his ideas are finding a wider audience than ever before.
I mean, we saw that with the whole Groyper War incident, his attempt to push the Republican Party further to the right.
Exactly.
And even though he's been denounced by some Republicans, others seem to be embracing his brand of populism and nationalism.
It's a dangerous trend.
It is.
And it raises serious questions about the future of American democracy. Like, if a figure like Fuentes can gain this much influence, what does that say about the state of our political discourse?
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
So is there any hope for a more reasoned and less polarized future?
Right.
Or are we destined to just be swept up in this tide of extremism and division?
It's easy to feel pessimistic when faced with such a daunting challenge.
It is.
But history is full of examples of seemingly insurmountable obstacles being overcome.
Right.
The fight against extremism and intolerance is a long and difficult one.
Yeah.
But it's a fight worth having. We can't give in to despair.
And it's a fight that requires all of us to be engaged and informed.
Absolutely.
We can't just sit back and hope that someone else will take care of it.
No.
We each have a role to play in defending the values of democracy and tolerance.
And that starts with being aware of the tactics being used to manipulate and divide us.
Right.
We need to be critical consumers of information, especially online.
Right.
And we need to be willing to challenge those who are spreading hate and intolerance.
So don't just share that inflammatory meme or retweet that outrageous statement without really thinking about what it's saying and who it might be harming. We need to be more thoughtful and more responsible with our online interactions because the stakes are incredibly high.
The future of our democracy may very well depend on our ability to resist the siren song of extremism.
Yeah.
And to build a more inclusive and tolerant society.
It's a collective effort that requires us to be vigilant, informed, and engaged.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked a lot about Fuentes and his movement.
We have.
But he's not operating in a vacuum, is he?
Right.
He's part of a larger ecosystem of extremist figures and groups who share similar ideologies and tactics.
And understanding that ecosystem is crucial to understanding the threat that Fuentes poses.
Absolutely.
He's not just some lone wolf spouting hate speech from his basement.
Right.
He's connected to a network of white nationalists, anti-Semites, and other extremists who are working together to advance their agenda.
And they're using sophisticated tactics to spread their message and recruit new followers, especially online.
Right. Like it's almost like a multi-level marketing scheme for hate.
It is.
They prey on people's fears and insecurities, offering them a sense of belonging and purpose in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and uncertain.
That's a great analogy, and that's why it's so important to understand their tactics.
Yeah.
We need to be able to recognize the signs of extremist recruitment and know how to counter their arguments effectively.
Because once someone falls down that rabbit hole, it can be incredibly difficult to pull them back out.
It can.
So what are some of the red flags that we should be looking for?
Okay.
What are the telltale signs that someone might be getting sucked into this world of extremism?
One of the biggest red flags is a sudden shift in rhetoric. If someone starts using dehumanizing language, demonizing entire groups of people, or embracing conspiracy theories that promote violence and hatred, that's a major warning sign.
Like talking about immigrants as invaders or Muslims as terrorists, for example.
Exactly. Those are classic examples of dehumanizing language.
Right.
Designed to strip away the humanity of entire groups of people and make it easier to justify violence and discrimination against them.
Right.
Another red flag is an obsession with conspiracy theories.
Okay.
Especially those that lack any basis in reality.
Like the whole great replacement theory that Fuentes and other white nationalists are so fond of pushing.
That's a prime example.
Right.
This theory claims that there's this deliberate plot to replace white people with non-white immigrants.
Right.
And it's often used to justify violence against minority groups.
Right.
It's a dangerous and unfounded conspiracy theory.
It is.
But it's one that's gained alarming traction on the far right.
And that's incredibly concerning. Because when these kinds of ideas become mainstream, they can have devastating consequences.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've seen it time and time again throughout history.
We have.
Extremist ideologies left unchecked often lead to violence, persecution, and even genocide.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to push back against these ideas whenever and wherever we encounter them.
Right.
We can't afford to be complacent.
Yeah.
Silence is often interpreted as agreement, and that can be incredibly dangerous.
So how do we do that?
Right.
How do we effectively challenge these extremist narratives and prevent them from taking root in our communities?
One of the most important things is to engage in open and honest dialogue.
Oh,
We need to be willing to listen to people who hold different views, even if we find those views reprehensible.
right.
It's not about agreeing with them,
Right.
but it's about understanding where they're coming from and trying to find common ground.
And sometimes that means having those uncomfortable conversations.
It does.
Calling out hateful rhetoric and setting boundaries.
Yes.
It's about standing up for what we believe in, even when it's difficult.
You're absolutely right. It's not always easy,
Well,
especially when dealing with people who are deeply entrenched in their beliefs.
yeah,
But it's necessary.
it is.
We need to be clear that hate and intolerance are never acceptable. And we need to be willing to speak out against those who are promoting those ideas both online and offline.
So what can we do on an individual level?
Okay.
What are some practical steps that each of us can take to make a difference?
One of the most important things is to educate ourselves about the tactics that extremists use.
Okay.
The more we know about their methods, the better equipped we'll be to resist them.
So learn how to spot fake news propaganda misinformation.
Yes.
Don't just blindly share things online without verifying their accuracy.
Right.
Do your own research. Be critical of what you see, and don't be afraid to question the information that's being presented to you.
Exactly. And another important step is to support organizations that are working to combat extremism and promote tolerance.
Okay.
There are many great groups out there doing really important work in this area, and they need our support.
Right, whether it's donating money, volunteering our time, or simply spreading awareness about their work, every little bit helps.
It does.
And we can also make a difference in our own communities.
Yes.
By speaking out against hate and intolerance whenever we see it.
That's right.
Whether it's challenging a racist joke, reporting a hate crime, or simply having those difficult conversations with friends and family members who might be espousing extremist views.
Yeah.
We need to send a clear message that these behaviors are not acceptable.
It's about creating a culture where extremism is not tolerated.
Right.
And where diversity and inclusion are celebrated.
Well said. It's about building a better world.
Yeah, it is.
One where everyone feels safe and respected, regardless of their background beliefs or identity.
Yeah.
And that's a vision worth fighting for.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But there's still one more piece of the puzzle that we need to explore, and that's Fuentes' relationship with religion.
Right. He identifies as Catholic, right?
He does.
But some of his views seem to clash with the teachings of the church.
Right.
So how does he reconcile those seemingly contradictory positions?
Well, it's something that a lot of people have pointed out, including people within the Catholic community. They argue that he's basically cherry-picking elements of Catholicism to fit his own extremist agenda and using religious language and imagery as a shield for his white nationalist beliefs.
It's like he's trying to create this version of Christianity that aligns with his political ideology.
Exactly.
Rather than adhering to the actual teachings of the church.
Yeah, he often invokes Christian imagery and rhetoric,
Right.
but it's a very selective and distorted interpretation.
Okay.
You know, one that ignores those core values of compassion and love and social justice
Right.
that are central to the faith.
So do you think he's using religion as a tool for manipulation?
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
I mean, he understands the power and influence of religion in American society,
Okay.
and he's clearly attempting to tap into that power to advance his own goals.
Right.
So it really raises the question, is this a genuine expression of faith, or is it a calculated strategy to broaden his appeal?
It's a dangerous game he's playing now.
It is.
Because if people start to see religion as a justification for hate and intolerance, that could have devastating consequences for our society.
Absolutely. It's essential to push back against this kind of distortion of religious teachings.
Yeah.
You know, we need to reclaim the true meaning of faith
Right.
and make it clear that it cannot be used as a weapon to justify bigotry and discrimination.
Right.
True faith, regardless of the specific religion, should be a force for good in the world, promoting understanding and compassion, not division and hatred.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
You know, Fuentes' background, his ideology, his tactics, his relationship with Trump, his use of religion.
Right.
The concerning growth of his movement. It's been a fascinating,
It has.
if somewhat disturbing journey
Yeah.
into the world of a figure who's simultaneously captivating and repellent.
He is.
But as always, we want to leave our listeners with something to ponder,
Okay.
something to spark further reflection.
I like it.
So in this age of information warfare, where algorithms are designed to amplify outrage, how do we cultivate a more discerning and critical mindset?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is, how do we resist the temptation to just react emotionally to headlines and hot takes,
Right.
and instead engage in thoughtful, nuanced conversations about these complex challenges facing our society?
Yeah, it's easy to get swept up in the emotional current of the moment,
It is.
to react instinctively rather than reflectively.
Right.
But developing that critical lens,
Yeah.
the ability to step back and analyze the information we're consuming to consider different perspectives and motivations is crucial.
Yeah, and it's not just about consuming information critically.
Right.
It's about how we engage with each other.
It is.
Can we disagree respectfully?
Yeah.
Can we have those difficult conversations without resorting to personal attacks or dismissing those who hold different views?
Yeah, that's the key.
Yeah. The future of our democracy may very well depend on our ability to engage in civil discourse, even when it's challenging,
It's true.
and find common ground amidst our differences.
We need to remember that we're all human beings at the end of the day.
We do.
Regardless of our political beliefs, religious affiliations, or cultural backgrounds.
Yeah.
We all have a shared responsibility to create a better world for ourselves and future generations. And that starts with recognizing our shared humanity and treating each other with respect, even when we disagree.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of Nick Fuentes.
Okay.
Remember, knowledge is power.
It is.
Use it wisely.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time,
Yeah.
stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.